If you enjoy listening and watching welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Legette.
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into another edition of Gamecock Pod Live for February the 21st, episode number 1421. And in just a few minutes, we will be joined by our special guest from Pro Football Focus, Max Chadwick. He'll join the show. We'll talk about Spencer Rattler and Xavier Legette, their draft status and stock leading up to the NFL Combine. And we'll ask him to look into his crystal ball and look ahead towards the NFL Draft on April 25th, 26th, and 27th, where those guys could be drafted and maybe what are the best fits for Spencer Rattler and Xavier Legette. And we will also dive into South Carolina's highly touted transfer portal class, ranked number 5 by On3 Sports, number 9 by 24/7 Sports, and of course headlined by Raheim Rocket Sanders. But first, let's dive into your Nana's Porch news, notes, and headlines, brought to you by the award-winning full-service catering company, Nana's Porch, servicing the greater Charlotte area. Whether it's a banquet, a wedding, a corporate event, a backyard bash with a whole hog barbecue, Nana's Porch has got you covered. Hey, maybe you want to, before the weather gets too warm, have that big backyard bash with the whole hog barbecue. Nana's Porch, your go-to for that. Want to bring in a food trailer? Nana's Porch, voted among the top 3 by the local newspaper poll for the best food trucks in the Charlotte area. And as we all know, their award-winning pimento cheese voted number 1 and number 2 in the meat and cheese category by the North Carolina Specialty Foods Association. Get in touch with my good friend Chris Payne at nanasporch.com, nanasporch.com. All right, yesterday Shane Beamer completed his 2024 coaching staff by formally introducing Sean Elliott. I will have more comments on that, on the coaching staff in general, my thoughts on the new additions in segment number 2 after we're joined by Max Chadwick. Gamecock men's basketball, since the last time I was with you, we dropped 2 games. You had the 40-point blowout loss to Auburn, which happens. Ask number 1 UConn. They got boat raced by Creighton last night. But then the Gamecocks laid an egg and they let Auburn beat them twice, blowing a 16-point second half lead, losing 64-63 to LSU, which, by the way, is the lowest rated team on the schedule. Gamecocks, things are never as good as they seem. Things are never as bad as they seem. Gamecocks were ranked as high as number 11. They come in at number 20 this week. I think that's probably about right. The team gets a much-deserved midweek bye and gets to recharge the batteries, sharpen the saw, work on some fundamentals and some self-corrections, and get ready for what will be a brutal 5-game stretch to end the season beginning Saturday at Ole Miss. That will be a quad 1 game. Then a week from tonight at Texas A&M at 8:30 on the SEC Network. Also a quad 1 road game. Then on Saturday, March the 2nd, Florida comes to Colonial Life Arena. And the game has been moved to noon at ESPN. Well, you hope for the same result as your last SEC home game at noon on ESPN, and that was Mississippi State to open the season. That will also be a quad 1 game. Then you host the Tennessee Vols on Wednesday, March the 6th at 7 p.m. on ESPN2. That will be a quad 1 game. Tennessee ranked in the top 10, and then you close out the season at Mississippi State at the Hump, 2:30 on the SEC Network Saturday, March the 9th. Women's basketball made SEC history on Sunday with their 43rd consecutive SEC regular season win. Tomorrow, they will go for win number 44, and if they get it, Dawn Staley will have captured her 8th regular season SEC crown since becoming head coach of the program. It was also revealed there will be a statue of Dawn Staley that will be placed directly across from the State House grounds, and today she was named to the Naismith watch list for the National Coach of the Year. This will probably be her 3rd time winning that award. And the SEC likely going to a 9-game conference scheduling model beginning in 2026. So the Gamecocks have pushed back a 2027 home game with East Carolina to 2030, which will leave the Gamecocks with just 3 non-conference opponents each of the next 6 years following the 2024 season. I would expect some further adjustments to be made because you've got a home and home with Miami. You've got Virginia Tech in there. And if I'm South Carolina, you're going to have 9 SEC games plus Clemson, unless there's more conference realignment, which we can't rule out. And so we will see about that. All right, let's bring in the man himself, Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus and the host of the Preferred Walk-On, which is PFF's college football show, which you can catch here on YouTube or just like our show on Spotify or Apple Podcast. Max, welcome in.
I'm
friend.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm sorry, my computer had to reboot right when I was trying to join this. That's why I was maybe a minute or two late, but I appreciate you having me on, though.
Perfect timing. Just wrapping up the news, notes, and headlines. So, hey, this is your first time on the show. We always like to learn about our first-time guests. So tell us about your background and what eventually led you to Pro Football Focus.
Yeah, so I've always loved football, and I knew pretty early on in my life that I wasn't going to be athletic enough to play at a very high level. So I kind of devoted that to writing, talking about football, and I knew I kind of wanted to make this a career when my mom instituted a rule at dinner where the first 5 minutes I could talk about football. The rest of the dinner, I could not talk about football. And I knew that if I was that obsessed that I should probably make a career out of it. So went to Syracuse University, studied broadcast and digital journalism there. Always loved PFF. I actually started a podcast with some of my friends covering the NFL draft. We interviewed some PFF guys, kept in touch with them, applied for an internship there, got it. I got a full-time job here, and now I'm the college football analyst for them as well, which has been honestly a dream come true for me. So I'm kind of living the dream in terms of what I wanted to do with my life right now, which is really, really cool. And I'm really appreciative of PFF for taking a chance on me. But yeah, like I said, it's just been a terrific time so far at PFF, and I'm excited for what the future holds.
Awesome. So, hey, today we want to talk about, obviously, Spencer Rattler, Xavier, Legette. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about the Preferred Walk-On show. Tell us how our viewers and listeners can check you out on that. How often do you drop the show? And obviously, the NFL Combine's just around the corner. Lots of discussion going to be held from now until after the NFL draft. It seems like the NFL, they own not just January and February, but March and April and even into May.
Yeah, obviously. So, yeah, you mentioned Preferred Walk-On. How that started really was I was originally just a writer for PFF. And Dave Sofar, who I'm sure you've interacted with, he's terrific at his job. He got me interviews with some major college football players, guys like Caleb Williams, guys like Bo Nix. I've interviewed Jaden Daniels, a lot of big-time players, and I interviewed them, and I turned them into articles, which is great. But then I also wanted to say, hey, you know what? I want to put these interviews out in full. I want to, the full 20 minutes with these one-on-one interviews to be out. So I asked PFF if I could do that. They let me do that. And then they kind of wanted to make it a show. So we actually added a guy named Dalton Wasserman, who's a data collection guy here at PFF. He's phenomenal. He's my co-host now on the show. And yeah, we drop episodes once a week during the offseason. It'll be twice a week during the actual season, probably twice a week actually after the draft is over, because then we get into preview mode for college football. But yeah, we're kind of in NFL draft mode right now. Once the draft's over, we're getting to college football 2024 preview mode, interview a bunch of players after the draft is over as well. So yeah, you can find it Preferred Walk-On on YouTube, like you said, also wherever you get your podcasts. I will caution people, we are renaming it to PFF's College Football Show, I believe, next week. So if you search up Preferred Walk-On next week, which today is February 21st right now, you might not be able to find it. So look up PFF's College Football Show, and you should find it under that as well. But yeah, it's been awesome so far, and I'm excited for the future. Awesome.
Well, yeah, we've been through a rebranding campaign here as well, so I'm no stranger to that. All right, so let's jump in. Let's talk about Spencer Rattler, who obviously, I saw him when he was a high school senior in San Antonio at the All-America Bowl. He was the number one quarterback in the class. He went to Oklahoma, redshirted, sat it on fire as a redshirt freshman. There, redshirt more. Caleb Williams comes in. He ends up getting benched. He and Austin Stogner basically broke the internet and Gamecock Twitter when they announced they were transferring to South Carolina. And so Rattler spent his final 2 seasons in Columbia. We'll get into that in just a little bit, but Rattler was named to the Senior Bowl, and prior to the Senior Bowl director Jim Nagy said, the NFL really likes Spencer Rattler a lot more than the media does. And so then after that week of practice, Rattler turned heads, was named the MVP of the Senior Bowl. Nagy's comments afterwards were, hey, I think the media is finally catching up to how the NFL feels about Spencer Rattler. So on February 21st, how does Max Chadwick feel about Spencer Rattler?
I like Spencer Rattler a lot. I loved him at Oklahoma. In fact, I thought he was going to be the number 1 overall pick in 2022. A couple of years ago, obviously did not happen that way. Like you mentioned, he got benched basically halfway through the season, transferred to South Carolina. His arm talent is special and something that he really did well at Oklahoma. He played out of structure at a really, really high level. I loved what Rattler showed, kind of some Zach Wilson BYU stuff that you saw from Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma. Now, obviously, Zach Wilson has not worked out at the NFL level, but Rattler has the arm talent to be an NFL starter. Now, there are bad habits that he has to get rid of, and a lot of that has to do with, relying on out of structure a little bit too much. But I did think he actually improved a lot this past season. And I do think he will be probably we will be a day 2 pick in the NFL draft, either a late second round pick or most likely, in my opinion, probably a third round pick in the NFL. But he could get a shot as a starter in the NFL at some point in his career, which is pretty incredible considering where he was just a couple years ago.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, look, until I guess it'd be the 11th game of his junior season at South Carolina, Spencer Rattler had kind of been pedestrian. But I don't think a lot of people really understand just how moronic and stupid his offensive coordinator was at South Carolina. About 70% of the throws were parallel or within 3 yards of the line of scrimmage. Look, I had Dave on the show. I had that SEC stat guy on the show. Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma had proven he was elite when you got him outside the pocket, and he was also PFF's number 2 quarterback going into his first year at South Carolina, second only to Bryce Young, because he had such a high percentage on the deep ball, which is the lowest percentage throw to make. Rattler was elite. Okay. And we just call him Captain Dumbass here on the podcast up until he was told, hey, no more than 15 or 20 plays and no more than 3 personnel groupings. He was paralyzed because of the overabundance of plays each week on the play sheet, and then the guy going off script and trying to call something they hadn't called in a month or practiced in a month. He was paralyzed. I just don't think a lot of people realize that. But then you look at the Tennessee, the Clemson game, and then the Notre Dame game, you saw a completely different player, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're right. I think the Tennessee game especially, he showed a lot of what made him such an enticing quarterback at Oklahoma. You know, he's throwing the ball deep downfield, some nice dimes. And I agree with you. I think they didn't let him throw the ball downfield enough. I do think some of that had to do with the offensive line and not just giving him enough time to find those deep shots downfield. I think that's been a big issue with South Carolina, is just not being able to protect Rattler and let him work within structure more. But yeah, I agree. I think this past year was a lot better than what he showed in his first year. His first year at South Carolina, let's face it, was not that great at all. I actually think he had more turnover-worthy plays that year than he did big-time throws, which is never a good sign. This past year, he did better. So I am a fan of Rattler for sure. And at the Senior Bowl, he showed some really encouraging stuff too. So I think he could be, like I said, I think he will be a day 2 pick and might get a shot in the NFL at some point.
Well, I mean, I think Dow Loggins should get a lot of credit for that. They scaled down the offense. Dow Loggins come in with 15 years of experience in the National Football League, but also 2 years in college to understand you can't have 115 plays and 18 to 20 personnel groupings when you get 15 hours per week of work, which is basically what they get. I know it's 20 hours, but 4 that counts as the game. And so you're not getting that much work. And I also think Rattler was limited this year because of the injuries on the offensive line and the injury to Juice Wells. People kind of seem to forget South Carolina was up 14-3 on Georgia in Athens, and Juice Wells re-injures his foot on the touchdown that put them up 14-3.
Yeah, absolutely. Juice Wells is a phenomenal receiver. Obviously, now he's at Ole Miss. Really good after the catch player. And yeah, I mean, you could have had him and Xavier Legette as Rattler's top 2 options. And the fact he took away one of those definitely hurt South Carolina a lot. So I like Juice Wells a lot. I think he would have been a huge help to Rattler this past season. But I still think Rattler performed well even without one of his top targets in 2023.
And the fact that, not 9 sacks against North Carolina to open the season.
Yep.
And, musical chairs on the offensive line. But I think South Carolina made a major step yesterday in solving that by bringing in Sean Elliott, bringing him back from Georgia State. We're going to talk about that more in segment 2. I also think South Carolina, did have, it seemed like every injured player was an offensive lineman. I mean, it just was not good. And so the NFL Combine is coming up. And so for Spencer Rattler, what does he need to do? Because I think he's going to interview exceptionally well. What does he need to show the scouts and the GMs at the NFL Combine and then at his senior day coming up later in the spring? And then obviously he'll probably go on a bunch of individual workouts for teams.
Yeah, I think the NFL Combine, is a very overrated event for quarterbacks. I don't really know if too much will change. I think the only thing that will affect quarterbacks' draft stock is how they interview with teams. And unfortunately, we don't have access to that, so we don't know how they will interview with teams. I know Spencer Rattler, interview-wise, has been kind of a hot-button issue. Remember, some people had issues with him based off the Netflix series, QB1, I believe it was. Didn't really come off the best in that, but also he's a 17-year-old kid in that as well. He's really matured. I think you make a good point. He's really matured since then. We actually interviewed him. PFF did, Trevor Sikkema did at the Senior Bowl, or actually during this past week or a couple weeks ago, the Super Bowl, and he was a great interview, honestly. So I think Spencer Rattler is going to do a lot better in the interview process than people think. That's really where I think he can affect his stock the most, is in the interview process. And maybe he'll throw. He might be one of the quarterbacks that does decide to throw at the NFL Combine. So some teams might want to see him throw in person, but I don't really think that will affect his stock too much. I don't think any of the athletic testing will really affect his stock either that much. I think for quarterbacks, the big thing for them is interviews. And I think Rattler, that's the big thing for him, is just interview well with the teams that he's going to talk to at the NFL Combine.
All right, so potentially what teams could be the best fit for Spencer Rattler? I mean, obviously the quarterback position is the most important position in the sport of football, but particularly at the NFL level. I mean, does a team trade up? Does he, do teams, because look, for me, I think there's kind of 3 tiers of quarterbacks in the top 7. To me, tier 1 is Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels in some order, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Some guys like Daniels better. Some guys like Drake May more. I would say, Drake May has not played a lot of football. And there was a guy several years ago at Southern Cal named Jeff Sanchez that didn't play a lot of football, but lit it up, was a high pick, and ended up having a very mediocre career. I think J.J. McCarthy is kind of in a tier 2 by himself. And then I think the next tier in some order is Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, and Spencer Rattler. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting tiering. I probably put Penix and Nix in that second tier with J.J. McCarthy. I think that they are closer than people think to them. But Rattler probably would be in that third tier. Some other guys like Michael Pratt from Tulane comes to mind. There's some other quarterbacks in that tier too. But yeah, to answer your question of what teams could be looking at him, I think Rattler needs to go to a situation where he's not going to be relied on to be the guy immediately. But a team that, has an aging quarterback, or a team that could be moving on from a quarterback pretty soon. So teams that come to mind, say the Vikings, if they keep Kirk Cousins, maybe that'd be good for Rattler to sit behind Cousins for a couple years, then maybe take over when Cousins finally retires. Maybe the Broncos, if they keep Russell Wilson, that could be an option as well. I know the Falcons are going to be interested in a quarterback. I don't know if they'll be able to get one. The Giants, with Daniel Jones still under contract. Rattler could maybe sit behind him for a little bit. The Raiders, the Raiders, he'll probably be pressed to be a starter a little bit quicker. So I don't love that, but they could still be interested in him. The Saints, I think, is a really interesting one too, because the Saints, Derek Carr is going to be under contract for at least the next year or two, and they really can't get out of it too quickly. So Rattler can sit under Derek Carr and learn from him. The Rams, I think, with Matthew Stafford getting older, Steelers, there's a lot of teams, honestly, that could use a guy like Spencer Rattler to develop as the next quarterback in the future. So, again, I wouldn't take him until the second or third round, but I think that's kind of the range where some teams will say, okay, we could take this guy, not play him for a year or two, and then hopefully he turns into a guy that we can trust to be the starter moving forward. I think that's kind of what Spencer Rattler's ideal outlook will be in the NFL.
Yeah, I think the Rams would be a very interesting fit for him, sitting behind Matthew Stafford for a couple years, learning that Sean McVay offense. I think that could be good. For me, I'm hoping my Atlanta Falcons sign Kirk Cousins and then draft J.J. McCarthy and let him sit for a couple years behind him, although I'm not opposed to trading a second or third round pick for Justin Fields either.
Yeah.
All right. Xavier Legette also turned heads at the Senior Bowl and turned heads all season long. Problem is, he's kind of a one-hit wonder, right? Like 2 or 3 years ago, according to Clark Brooks, the SEC stat cat, was the guy statistically you did not want to throw the football to because he had such a high drop rate. He obviously developed. He was hindered by injuries, but at 6'1", 227 pounds, was clocked at 22 miles per hour on that catch and run for a 75-yard touchdown against Mississippi State, which was faster than Tyreek Hill. What is intriguing about Xavier Legette, and also what is the other side of the coin with Xavier Legette?
Yeah, I think the size and speed is the first thing that comes to mind with him. You mentioned 6'1". He actually came in a lot shorter than people expected him to be. He actually was listed by South Carolina at 6'3". So I think that does hurt him a little bit because he was thought of as this great contested catch guy. You can go up and get it. And he still can do that. Don't get me wrong. But you feel a little bit better about that guy translating in that aspect to the NFL when he's 6'3" compared to a guy who's 6'1". But like you said, the size and speed is really good. He had a great year this past year. The concern with him, obviously, like you said, is just this has kind of been a first-year breakout for him. And a lot of it was because Juice Wells went down with an injury. Xavier Legette was able to step in and be the guy for Spencer Rattler this year. So remains to be seen what he could be at the NFL level. I still think he's a guy that will go late second round, early third round probably. And some team will covet him as being a guy who can go up and get it. Bigger, still a good size for a receiver, even if he's not as big as South Carolina listed him as. But still a guy who can go up and get in. And like I said, he's a really fast player for his size too. He's a guy I'm very excited to see at the NFL Combine because he could turn some heads with what he runs and what he weighs in at too. So you should test really well at the NFL Combine and maybe move up draft boards because of it.
I mean, I could definitely see that. I also think because of his special teams resume, you know, against Texas A&M in 2022, he took the top off Williams-Brice Stadium with a 100-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. He's on all special teams as a gunner. And just a guy that is relentless in practice, played for one of the best special teams coaches in the country in Pete Limbo. How much do you think his special teams resume could help his draft stock?
Yeah, I think it will for sure. I mean, like I said, he's a guy who's proven to be a capable return number 4. He could also play other positions in special teams. I think that's always a big thing too with these guys is that, hey, can you contribute on the third side of the ball? You know, can you contribute on special teams? And I think Xavier Legette can. And I think that'll be definitely a plus on his scouting report, honestly, because, you know, that could have him on higher on teams' boards just because they say, okay, listen, we draft this guy with the expectation that he could maybe turn into one of our top 3 receivers, but also he could be a key contributor on special teams too. So that's important to NFL teams more than people might think. So I think that'll definitely be something that adds to his resume for the NFL level.
All right, so obviously everybody's looking for a game-changing receiver to go with their quarterback. What teams could be the best fits for him? Maybe late second round or early in the third round?
Yeah, it's a good question again. I think there's so many teams that could use another receiver. You really can't get too many receivers, honestly. I think a team like the Titans could potentially use another receiver there. Teams like the Chargers could use another receiver. I mean, obviously the Cardinals are going to take probably Marvin Harrison Jr. The Patriots, if they take a quarterback, could definitely need to go after a receiver later on as well. Again, there's so many teams. The Jets could use maybe another one as well. I think there really is no shortage of teams that could use more help at what has become one of the most important positions in the NFL. You need more than just one guy, honestly. So there are a lot of teams that don't have a proven 3 guys, and I think Xavier Legette would be expected to be one of those 3 guys. So I honestly, there is no shortage of teams, I think, that could take another receiver and take a guy like Xavier Legette. So it's hard kind of nailing down one team for him, just because there are so many teams that could definitely use his services in the NFL level.
All right, good stuff. All right, so let's transition to some new guys who are coming into South Carolina. Gamecocks had one of the largest transfer portal classes in the country, 18 scholarship players, 2 other guys transferring that are South Carolina natives back home that are part of that class. But clearly the headliner, Raheim Rocket Sanders, who 2 years ago, when healthy, for my money, was probably the best back in college football. His season cut short due to injury and really marred by injuries this past year. What do you like about Rocket Sanders? And so obviously he's the headliner. Let's start there.
Yeah, Rocket, he actually was one of the guys I interviewed last year. Terrific guy. He actually has a kid, and he's a terrific father too. Big thing with him is the size and speed, man. I mean, a lot like Xavier Legette. I mean, this guy is like 230 plus pounds, and he can run. There's a reason why he's called Rocket. I mean, he really can hit a home run in every single play. So that's going to be huge in South Carolina's offense. Without Spencer Rattler now, they're probably going to rely on Rocket Sanders a lot as their offense is going to be really reliant on the run game at the next level. So I'm excited to see what he can do. Again, you mentioned he was really marred by injury this past season. Did not look effective at all because of that. But the year before, he was one of the best running backs in college football. If you can get back to that, I think that's a huge, huge addition to South Carolina's offense.
So for me, he's definitely a 3-down back, not only in college, but at the next level. In high school, he was listed as a wide receiver, and it came down to South Carolina and Arkansas. He's from Rockledge, Florida, right outside of Daytona Beach. And he got to Arkansas, and, you know, you don't see a lot of 220-pound receivers coming out of high school that stay at wide receiver. I didn't know what position he would play. He wound up, you know, even as a freshman, as a number 2 running back and having a big year. And then in 2022, led the SEC in rushing. I also think he probably got too big this past year. I think that's a big key, is if South Carolina can get him back down to that 220 to 225 size that he had in 2022. I mean, I just think he could be a big-time difference maker in this offense, who will have a young quarterback in Lenora Sellers, but dynamic as a dual threat guy, as well as having a rocket for an arm.
Yeah, for sure. I think Lenora Sellers, him being in the run game is going to be really interesting, because I think Arkansas kind of built that offense around the ground game between KJ Jefferson at quarterback and Rocket Sanders at running back, and that really worked out well for them when Rocket was healthy. I was going to be curious to see if that'll be the same kind of thing with Laura Sellers as the quarterback at South Carolina as well. Who also has a really good arm, and I'm excited to see what he could do as a starter. But if he can add to the ground game as well, I think that'll just make South Carolina's offense even more dangerous next year.
No doubt. So who are some of the other guys, maybe 2, 3, 4 guys that really stand out to you in this transfer portal class besides the obvious Rocket Sanders?
Yeah, I think the first one I would probably go to is Gage Larvadain, the receiver from Miami of Ohio. Really productive receiver from Miami this past season. Really good hands, did not have a high drop rate at all. Really good separator as well. A little bit of a smaller receiver. He's 5'10", 165, so definitely a skinnier guy. But he's definitely a guy that I think should contribute immediately for South Carolina next year as one of their top guys. And then some other guys I really like. Bengali Kamara, the linebacker / a little bit of edge defender who played for Pitt. He's also really graded highly in our system over the last few years. There's a lot of guys. South Carolina, like you said, has really done well in the transfer portal, bringing in a lot of players. They did lose a lot of players as well, but they brought in a really, really good transfer portal class and probably has one of the top transfer portal classes, honestly, in college football. So Gage Larvadain, like I said, will probably be the next headliner for me after Rocket Sanders, and then Bengali Kamara, another guy I really like. Demetrius Knight, the linebacker from Charlotte, I think is a solid player. South Carolina did a really good job, I think, in this portal and getting key contributors that should immediately make an impact for them for next year.
All right, so one guy I want to bring up you didn't mention played at North Carolina Central in the FCS, and that is center Torricelli Simpkins, 6'5", 320. I don't know if you've scouted him yet, but a good friend of mine, Cedric Williams, who is an all-SEC offensive lineman at South Carolina, coached him. He thinks he is a day one starter in the SEC and not just at South Carolina. I mean, this is a guy, when you turn on the film, it just jumps out. And look, it's just not guys from the SEC and the Big Ten or the Pac-12 that make the NFL. You see guys coming from Division II, Division III, and certainly there have been plenty of NFL Hall of Famers from HBCUs and the FCS level. Have you scouted Torricelli Simpkins at all? And if so, what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I like him a lot. I think he's definitely a guy that's going to be an underrated part of that offensive line that, like we mentioned before, needs to get improved. And I think he's got the great size for the position at center at 6'5", 310. This past year, he actually graded out pretty well, had a 72.1 grade, 76 pass blocking grade. Now, there is a concern like that. Those numbers aren't elite numbers. And usually when you project guys from the FCS level to the Power 5 level, you want to see them dominate the FCS level for you to feel good about them, especially moving to the conference, the best conference in America, like the SEC, especially in the trenches. So there might be a little bit of a learning curve for him there, but there is no doubt that he does have a lot of potential and a guy that will probably be relied on immediately for South Carolina on that interior offensive line to be day one a really good pass protector, which is what he showed at NC Central.
All right. Well, hey, Max, great stuff. I can't thank you enough for jumping in. Hopefully after the draft and spring practice winds down, hopefully we could get you back on to talk a little post-draft and then also about what we learned about South Carolina in spring practice. Tell us where we can catch all of your stuff and follow you on social media.
Yeah, for sure. So all my articles live at pff.com. Actually, currently right now, I'm ranking the top 10 players at every single position in college football entering next year. So that's been a lot of fun. And then also, like we mentioned before, preferred walk-on once a week right now during the offseason until after the draft is over. Then we'll probably go to twice a week. But that lives on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcast as well. It will be renamed PFF's College Football Show probably very, very soon. So look up that. And then also you can find me on Twitter, TikTok, at Max Chadwick, CFB as well.
Max, thank you so much for joining the show. Great stuff, great insights. We love PFF here on Gamecock Pod Live. And we'll be following you, man, and can't wait to have you back on the show. And we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. All right. That was Max Chadwick from PFF Pro Football Focus. I'll be right back after this commercial message.
If you enjoy listening and watching the free Wednesday show, now live streaming on YouTube, and would love more Gamecock Pod daily, join our growing Gamecock family by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber. You'll be able to listen to the show every day of the week and listen to guests like J.C. Sherbert, Hale McGranahan, and John Whittle from thebigspur.com, Colin Taylor and Mike Uva from Gamecock Central, Emily Adams from the Greenville News, Ben Portnoy, Michael Lanana, and Jeremiah Holloway from GoGamecocks.com, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC podcast, and many, many more. As a VIP subscriber, you can join or listen to the weekly live Zoom call with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. After the show is an unrecorded overtime segment where the real scoop gets dropped and discussed. It's like going down to your local pub or sports bar and having a conversation with your Gamecock friends about last week's football game, men's and women's basketball games, and Gamecock baseball. And of course, there's always recruiting to discuss. In addition to the weekly Zoom call, VIP subscribers get the most popular podcast, The Morning After, which is released every Sunday morning during football season, and more VIP perks are in the works. Follow Keith on Twitter at KAllset, or follow the show on Twitter at Gamecock Pod. Go to the top of the homepage and follow the link. If all else fails, go to patreon.com/Gamecock Pod Daily. Join now and get up to 3 months free off an annual VIP subscription. You will love it, guaranteed. Now, back to Gamecock Pod Live.
All right, great stuff from Max Chadwick there today. A couple of notes I did want to get in. Monday evening, a guy that I have been opining for to join the South Carolina staff really for 3 years now was Christian Robinson. He was at Baylor. Of course, he is the son of former Gamecock Kenneth Gus Robinson. Played and coached at Georgia for Mark Richt, worked at Mississippi State and Florida, and then was at Auburn. He interviewed when Sterling Lucas was hired, and spent the last 2 years at Baylor with Dave Aranda, one of the best in the business. He has been hired by new Alabama head coach Kalen DeBoer. All right. Also, wanted to mention women's basketball. They will be at home tomorrow night against Alabama. That game will be on the SEC network. If South Carolina wins, they will win the regular season in the SEC. They are the only unbeaten team in all of college basketball. And in fact, they are the only Power 5 team with fewer than 3 losses. So Paige Becker's also announced she's coming back next year. I don't know why, but she will have the distinction as likely being the first UConn player to lose 5 consecutive times to South Carolina as Dawn Staley's team is reloading. Joyce Edwards, a finalist for the Naismith National High School Player of the Year, along with a young lady we've talked about on the pod, Sarah Strong, the daughter of Chester and Harvard great Allison Feaster and Great Falls great Danny Strong. Unfortunately, I got to coach against him. Great Falls won the state championship in both football and basketball, but I also got to know him by coaching him in AAU with his head coach, John Smith, a legend in the high school coaching community and a guy that was a mentor to me and just one of the nicest people I've ever come into contact with, both of them. Sarah Strong, the number 1 player in the country, she was present for that South Carolina UConn game. She just had her senior night and was unstoppable, was 7 of 8 from 3, and the only one she missed was a 3/4 court heave at the end of one of the quarters. So South Carolina, I think, don't bet against Dawn Staley with that one. All right, so I did want to get into Shane Beamer's coaching staff now that is complete. If you look at last year's coaching staff, okay, Dowell Loggins will return as the offensive coordinator. I think, that was a major upgrade. South Carolina got rid of a major cancer on their coaching staff and a guy that was really the Titanic of offensive coordinators. And I'm excited to see what Dowell Loggins does now after having gone through a year at South Carolina. Now he's going to have a completely different style of quarterback in Lenora Sellers. He's not going to have Xavier Legette or Juice Wells. I don't think the Gamecocks are finished at wide receiver. It wouldn't shock me if they didn't add at least 2 more wide receivers in this next transfer portal period. South Carolina also lost a lot of dead weight by firing Monterio Hardesty, who was honestly the worst recruiter on the coaching staff. A guy that could not retain his players either. And a guy that basically Shane Beamer called out for issues. Number 1, recruit your position, retain guys at your position, and maintain your room so that problems from your room don't end up on his desk or in his office. And Hardesty couldn't do any of that. So he's gone. South Carolina made a major upgrade at that position by bringing in Marquell Blackwell, who is an absolute shark and an ace on the recruiting trail. James Coley said, "Hey, I've had to recruit against this guy. I never like bumping into him on the trail or going head to head because he was just tough to beat." Okay, this guy, Coach Kareem Hunt at Toledo, worked at West Virginia and at Houston for Dana Holgerson, one of the brightest offensive minds in college football. He was co-coordinator. He's a native of the Tampa area, played for USF, strong Tampa connections, also a lot of strong recruiting ties all over the state of Florida, because at West Virginia, they really recruit the state of Florida and in particular South Florida. And then spending that time at Houston and at Texas A&M, I love the Houston and the East Texas recruiting ties there. Okay, Justin Stepp out. He's at Illinois. He was essentially demoted because his recruiting had basically been anemic, a lot of bad evaluations and takes, but a great developmental coach. You can't deny what he did with Jalen Brooks, with Josh Vann, and with Xavier Legette. But nonetheless, he's gone. You bring in James Coley, a guy who has worked for some of the legends of college football, Bobby Bowden, Nick Saban, was coordinator for Kirby Smart at Georgia. He's coached multiple positions. He's coached quarterbacks. He's coached tight ends. He's coached wide receivers. I think he will be involved with the tight ends, helping Sean Elliott with the passing game aspect because of his background as a tight ends coach and a receivers coach, and because I would expect Elliott as a run game coordinator to be intimately involved with the offensive line. But before we get to him, you lose Pete Lembo. He gets a head coaching job at Buffalo. Their coach goes down. What's up, Happy? Goes to Alabama to be the co-defensive coordinator and coach the secondary. I didn't think there was any way in the world South Carolina would be able to upgrade from Pete Lembo at special teams. But by golly, Shane Beamer did it. He hired Joe DeCamillis. Okay. 34 years in the National Football League. The son-in-law of Dan Reeves, a former Gamecock great. But a guy with 2 Super Bowl rings, one with the Denver Broncos, one with the Los Angeles Rams. And here's what I really like is he spent this past year at Texas with Steve Sarkisian, okay, because he was very good friends with their special teams coordinator, but he was basically the in-game manager, time and score situations, timeout management, okay, and doing a lot of the things that Pete Lembo did. He will also be the associate head coach at South Carolina. But just like Dowell Loggins spent a spring at Penn State and then 2 years at Arkansas, Joe D got to see the difference between an NFL work week and a college football game week, okay, which is like apples and turnips, okay, not the same. So I like that he's seen that. I also like that he was part of a championship program. So he was with Texas in the spring, in the summer, in the fall. They played in their conference championship game, and they went to the college football playoff. And quite frankly, if Quinn Ewers wasn't so inconsistent, maybe they're playing for the college football championship. And so I like the fact he's got that experience on getting a team into the playoffs, going from a conference championship game, what that looks like, what the prep time, the off time, and then that week leading into the national semifinals is all about. And you got one of the most renowned special teams coaches of my lifetime in the National Football League. 34 years he spent with several organizations, with Dan Reeves, with the Atlanta Falcons, New York Giants. He's with the Denver Broncos when they won a Super Bowl, and Peyton Manning was the quarterback, but they basically won with defense and special teams. And then with the Los Angeles Rams, Ernest Jones was there. Okay, they won a Super Bowl. Andy's been in college. This was an absolute grand slam hire, no doubt about it. Now, to Sean Elliott, who was introduced yesterday. We had his opening statement, the Q&A. I love this hire. Okay, this hire almost took place in December. Okay, they were in talks. There was a possibility Shane Beamer may either add another offensive line coach or even potentially make a change. He didn't. But I love this hire. Why? Because Sean Elliott's been at South Carolina. He knows how tough it is to win at South Carolina. But guess what? He was a part of the staff that did it. Okay? Yeah, they had players, but they went out and got players. They ran the football with Marcus Lattimore, Kenny Miles, Mike Davis, Brandon Wilds, others. Okay, South Carolina was able to line up and run the football. It just wasn't throwing it up to Alshon. Okay, Connor Shaw was a dual threat quarterback, but more than that, okay, Sean Elliott's passion, his love for the game, and his passion and love for South Carolina. We're talking about a guy that got kicked out of Williams-Brice Stadium for getting into a fight at a South Carolina Clemson game as a fan. A guy that grew up in Camden. A guy that basically begged Steve Spurrier for that opportunity. Told him, hey, I really think I can make you better. And he did. He came in as the run game coordinator. South Carolina immediately got better on the offensive line. Okay, I think with his title, sure, he's going to coach the tight ends, but he is the run game coordinator. And so he is intimately going to be involved and have his hands on every part of that run game, which will include the offensive line. It will include, in my opinion, evaluating the personnel and where guys need to fit on the chessboard. Is this guy a tackle? Is he a guard? Is he a center? Can he pull? Can he do this on inside zone or outside zone or pin and pull? If you go back, you look at South Carolina with Elliott, you had T.J. Johnson, who was an NFL guy, okay? You had Alan Knott, who was not, but a guy that was athletic enough to get out and pull on run plays. And so I think Sean Elliott will be a sounding board. I think along with Dowell Loggins, with Marquell Blackwell and Lonnie Teasley, those guys will work together on that run game. I would expect Sean Elliott to be heavily involved in the development and the coaching of the offensive line, the physicality of the offensive line. I go back to when he was at South Carolina with Steve Spurrier, and Brad Lawing was coaching the defensive line, and Ellis Johnson was the defensive coordinator. And they just said, hey, guys, we've got to be more physical in practice. I can tell you from firsthand knowledge, okay, Brad Lawing and Sean Elliott pulling their guys off to the side and going good on good and really mixing it up and getting after each other. I can remember those guys going to Steve Spurrier and say, hey, coach, how about on Wednesdays we have one-on-ones in the red zone inside the 10-yard line, and we have a winner and a loser. And the winners, get this for dinner, and the losers have to eat this for dinner. And they did that. Iron sharpens iron, okay? You have to be physical. You go back to Sean Elliott at Appalachian State, 3 national championships, okay, and several other deep runs, and including going into the big house and running it right up Michigan's hind parts and breaking it off in their hind parts. At Georgia State, knocking off SEC teams. Georgia State was in the top 3 of their league in running the football every single year. Sean Elliott was there. And a lot of times with inferior players. But his scheme, the physicality, having a dual threat quarterback, that's why they went to 5 bowl games in 7 seasons. Okay, this guy is passionate. This guy believes in physicality. He believes in getting after it. And he will accept nothing less. Okay, in whether it's in coaching, in business, in parenting, in a relationship, in whatever aspect of life, you get what you tolerate. Okay, and Sean Elliott did not tolerate guys taking reps off and not being physical. Okay, he was ready to run Corey Robinson out of the program because he didn't realize Corey Robinson had sleep apnea. Brad Loyne, who recruited him, who coached at Havelock, said, hey, let me have him. He was always sleepy. Brad said, why are you always sleepy? Are you not getting a good night's rest? No, Coach, I go to bed. You know, I'm not up. I'm not out partying. He's like, well, do you think you have sleep apnea? What's that? Brad had sleep apnea. They had him take a sleep test. They got him diagnosed. He got on a CPAP. He went back over the offensive line and became an NFL player. Not only that, became an all-SEC player and a player I still remember from that Georgia game in 2014, along with A.J. Cann. South Carolina ran the ball up Georgia's hind parts, and they couldn't stop us. And that's why South Carolina won the game. Okay, so Sean Elliott is a guy that is universally beloved by the high school coaches in the state of North Carolina, in the state of South Carolina, in that Atlanta area. Don't think Sean Elliott has not built great relationships over the last 7 years in the state of Georgia. And I can tell you this, he was a very popular figure talking from with some high school coaches that were at that coaches clinic last weekend. There was a lot of glad handing and a lot of guys that were happy to see Sean Elliott back wearing that Under Armour Gamecock polo. He will be a plus recruiter, but he is going to be a guy that is going to have his hands all over that run game. He will be a guy that will be a sounding board and a mentor and a major help to Lonnie Teasel. Let's face it, guys. The one unit that South Carolina has to have that step up in 2024 with a young quarterback, with running backs like Rocket Sanders, Oscar Attaway, and a guy that I think is just going to be a stud, Jawarn Howell, who led the MEAC in rushing, okay, and didn't have a single 100-yard game until the last 3 games of the season, and he just went nuts. Led the MEAC, averaged over 7 yards a carry on the season. A guy with size and speed, just like Rocket Sanders, Oscar Attaway. Craig, what's good, my man? I just think Sean Elliott, with the personnel he has to work with. Okay, and by the way, Gage Larvadane's already up to almost 180 pounds. I don't think we're going to have to worry about his size. So spring practice is coming up. I'm going to have some spring position previews. Let me tell you what else is coming up, and that is tournament season for baseball. And so I'm going to be spending a lot of Thursdays and Fridays all day on the baseball field. So that's when I'm going to start dropping some of those position previews. Okay, probably one tomorrow, Friday, probably be able to have a pod, live pod on Friday. So look for some spring football position previews. Thank goodness men's basketball is off during the midweek. They need to regroup and get it together because of that daunting 5-game stretch. And, you know, South Carolina, I think, needs at least 2 more wins. And it's going to be a challenge. But, look, I'm not going to sell these guys short just because of one bad week. There's been a lot of teams that have had a bad week. They can bounce back. So that is my take on the coaching staff. There was no changes on the defensive staff. So, you know, Clayton White, for better, for worse, whatever, he's back for year 4. You still got Sterling Lucas. You got Travian Robertson, who's going into year 2. He's really got to beef up his room, okay, for 2025. This is going to be a room that will be senior laden this season with not a whole lot of experience or guys. He's playing from behind. Clayton White coaching the linebackers. I love what they've done building up that room. You heard it from Max Chadwick talking about Bengali, Kamara, and Demetrius Knight. And I love the 2 freshmen. Can't wait to see what they do. And then, you know, I just think wherever you get from Mokaba, maybe it's a bonus. He won't do anything in the spring. I don't even think there's a guarantee he will be back, but he is with the team. He's working on getting back. We'll see if he's able to get back. I love Jaron Willis. I like Debo Williams. So we'll see what happens there. And so until tomorrow, this has been Gamecock Pod Live, episode number 1421 for the 21st day of February. Hope you guys enjoyed the interview with Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus. That'll be up on Apple Podcast and Spotify here shortly. And so until tomorrow, I'll say go Gamecocks, God bless. And tonight, the Garnet and Black Town Hall, I'll be putting that up. That invite, we'll be getting together at 7 o'clock. So until then, Keith Allsep saying, have a great rest of the week, everybody. I am out of here.